Hey friends, my name is Prashant and welcome to SimpleJS. Today we are going to learn about closures. Closure is one of the most powerful concepts in JavaScript. Before we learn that, we need to know some basics. So let's run away to our basics. Scopes. Now, as you can see in this diagram, there is a box around every function. So in the outermost function, you can see that we try to declare a variable and we declare a new function inside that, and inside that we also declare a variable b. Now here inside your b function you can access both a and b. This is how scoping works in JavaScript and most of the languages also. Now this a can be used anywhere in the whole global scope, but b cannot be used here. So you cannot use b outside the function itself, even though you are going to call the function inside your global scope. Cool? This is our basic JavaScript scoping. Now let's check that out too. So we'll be creating a new file using our VS Code plugins. So we'll name it as scope.js. As you can see, I'll be printing both of them. So I'll be using the shortcuts of VS Code. It's a great editor and you can also do it. So we have integrated terminal where you can run your JS, and I'll be using Node.js to do it. You can also copy the same code on your browser console and do it. I'll be showing it to you that also. Node, and the file name is scope.js. Now we got an error. Why? So let's look through our output. So as you can see, inside foo we have access to both a and b, and in global we have only access to a. Now when it comes to b is not defined. The reason because you have declared b inside a function, and inside variables declared inside this function cannot be used outside. This is what our scope diagram also tells. See, you can access both of them here, but you can only access a here. You cannot access b here. So that's right. Now this is what our scope means. Now let's check out what does our closure mean. So let's jump into our closure file. We'll be creating a new file, command N, saving it as closure.js, and here we are. So I guess you guys found the problem that you cannot access b outside, right? But even after as soon as the function gets over, you cannot access the b variable. Now imagine if I give you the power to actually preserve the value of b whenever foo was called. So let's go to our closure explanation. Now closure is very simple. This function is in closure scope, so the green one. The reason because by definition of closure means that it can access the variables of the outer function and also the global function and its own functions, so its own variables whenever called. So imagine even if you call the outer function here, like the previous example, b dies as soon as your outer function is called, after your outer function execution stops. Now as soon as you call the c function, the function which is there inside, and if you are trying to use b inside this, you can still access it because of closures. So we'll see a live example of it. Closure, we will be writing our first closure. So we expect the output to be 0. So I'll be using an integrated terminal provided by VS Code, and VS Code provides this integrated terminal. The shortcut is Control backtick. So this is where you can actually see it, and we would be actually using Node.js to run our code. You can also run the same code on the browser. Just copy the content and open the console and paste it there. So let's see what our output is. So our counter is 0. So I'll tell you how the closure was actually formed. So we'll have a debugger right here. So we'll be using our debugger function. Let's close this first, provided by VS Code. So let's begin, and this is our breakpoint. So initially the program will run here as expected. So like you can see, our program is here. This is our first step, and the execution happens and we get our initial thing, and we are going to call this function. And as soon as this happens, you see that print counter is a function now. So here you can clearly see it. And here you can see that there is a closure that was created here. So the inner counter is a closure, and because you called this function here, create counter, the scope of the inner counter variable should have got over. And now in print counter, whenever you're going to call print counter, the scope will always be available here. So let's go into that function and check what happens. Now here you can see that our function is right here, and here internal counter is available. That is the reason why we saw the output of the closure. That is why you can see it here too. And this is how the closure got created. Now this is the most basic way of showing how a closure can be created. Now imagine you want to do more things, not just by returning a single function, and also adding the counter and incrementing the value. So let's just begin with that. Now we'll be modifying the same function, and we'll be adding a new function too. So our new function is a very simple function called as add. I'll be using add. I'll be just incrementing the internal counter. Oh, sorry, inner counter. Plus, and you can see the same one. And instead of printing it like this, what we will be doing is we will be calling show counter itself. So that's the reason why I'm doing this, and you will get to know once I run the debugger, and it will be fun too. And we would be returning an object instead of just returning a single function. So in the object we'll be having two things. One is our show counter function, and also our add function. So here it is, and this will change to our counter. So this is great, and we can use our functions in a very simple way by directly calling them instead of doing all this. So we'll be calling it like this, counter dot show counter. So we'll be trying to print we'll be printing our function first, and then we will also add it, and as soon as we add it, we should actually see our new counter value, and we'll add it again just for our reference. So let's begin and see our output. So command backtick is what I used. Let's clear output and same. So what happened this time? Let's check it out. So we had a add function and we got this. Oh, sorry. Someone has to call it, right? We didn't actually call it. That was a mistake, that's all. Nothing more. So this is our function again. We had to actually call this function. We just missed out on that. No problem. So let's run our function again. That's why it only printed it once. And this is what we get. The counter got incremented by 1 and also 2. Now see the best part. There was one closure created for show counter, and there was one more closure created for add. And in the other closure, the one in add, we also will have our show counter function in that closure. I'm going to show you how that happens. So let's put a debugger here. So the function will start running from here and it will come here. And in the return, we are going to get the counter object, and that is where we are gonna see where the closures are. So let's run it, and here is our create counter, and here is where our counter got called, and here is our counter. Counter object has 2 parameters, so let's look at it here. It would be easier for us to. In our add function, we have 2 things now. So we also have our internal counter and also our show counter as a closure itself. So because we referenced our show counter inside our add function, even this got added to the whole closure. So whenever you are returning something like this, that is when the closure gets created. So this is inside the closure of add, and inside the closure of our show counter function, even this has been accessed. So you can always access it. That is the best part, and this is how it happens. So same as with this as usual, and the same closure is also shared with this. That's where you can see it. Yes, that's the best part about closures. So this is how this works. Now remember that we send the whole object. Now what if you don't want to send the object? Because sending an object means receiving the object every time. So one more way of doing it would be something like this. So you have to pass an object above, and we'll be returning that. So not actually returning that, we would be actually appending our functions there. So config.add would be equal to add, and config.show counter would be show counter. Now we just beautifying the file, and here you can just create an object. An object, and you can actually pass it down to the create counter. So what happens here is you will be sending an object here in the create counter function, which will be passed in as config to the create counter function, and here you would be appending the addresses of the add function to .add and also the show counter function to this. Now here the scope is still maintained and the closure would also happen. So let's see the output just to verify. Now we have saved this file and just clear the output. And Node.js, this is how this also works. You might be thinking, how was the closure formed? So the best way I would suggest is just put a debugger here. Again, use the debugger tool. Run it. So what would happen is the first line would get executed, and the second line you would come here. just run this function, and in the counter object you would have all your functions. When you go down here, this is where you'll have your add function. Inside your add function you would have the closure available. In the closure you have both your inner counter and also the show function, because you use that function which is there inside, and it's also variable. Now this is one, and the other would be something like this. In a show counter function you again have the closure. In the closure you have it again. The access is still there, and when you try to execute these functions, it would actually be available here. Both show counter and this thing would be available. So I would just want to show you that what would happen when you come here. So you can see that in your closure you have both of them. So both your show counter function and this. This is quite simple to understand and quite easy, and you could actually use it at many places whenever you're trying to create multiple counters or something like that. This is the most useful way to do it. And as usual, this counter is not shared between different counters. It would always be unique for your own counter. So that's all, folks, and I hope you enjoyed this video and you would love to know more about closures and enjoy it. In case if you don't have Node.js, so I'll be opening up our browser and I'm copying the whole file. I'm waiting for our browser to load, and the browser is loaded. Just click on inspect. So once you click on inspect, you will be receiving the console. Just clear your console with that button and just paste your function, and you just click and enter. And please do subscribe to our channel for more such videos. Thank you. Bye bye.